Real estate isn't get rich quick, it's get rich guaranteed, but it takes time.
He has an impressive $12 million portfolio. He helps new investors follow his path. Jack Bernstein.
I had no help from anybody. No one gave me money. My parents didn't co-sign for me. There was nothing like that. So anybody can follow and do the same journey that I went down. The biggest thing you need to do is just take action and start with the first property. And that's where most people fail. They always find excuses not to take action. Someone needs roughly $40,000 to $50,000 to get in their first property in Toronto, which I don't think a lot of people believe. They think they need $150,000, $200,000. It's just simply not true.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Price to Sell podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Campoli. And before we get into it, actually, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Do your duties. If you guys have been finding tons of value in these episodes, just share them with friends that you think might find the same value. And it just really helps us on our end. But today's episode, we're going in all things real estate. I have a super successful self-made real estate entrepreneur in the house with me today. He has an impressive $12 million portfolio. He helps new investors follow his path. And today he's going to give us all of the golden nuggets. Jack Bernstein in the building.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for coming, man. So we connected not too long ago and we're kind of watching each other do our thing. But Jack is the man when it comes to scaling and investing properly and doing things the right way. A lot of people have found trust in you through your coaching platform and have gained success with that as well. But if you want to give the audience a little bit of an intro into who you are.
Yeah, so a bit of an unorthodox journey to kind of getting here. So I started off my career as a professional snowboarder for a long time. So I was sponsored by a bunch of big brands and competing all across North America.
Cool.
Yeah, so did about a 10-year stint as that. And at some point along my journey, I kind of realized that, I wasn't going to be a top 5 guy, and the top 5 guys are the ones who really make a good living at it. And actually ended up breaking my back snowboarding. So I'd moved to Whistler and was chasing the whole dream there and had to move home. And when I moved home, I ended up stumbling upon an idea to start an electronics manufacturing company for what at the time was actually a pretty cool idea. It was a cell phone charging station for like bars, restaurants, nightclubs, and things like that had digital advertisements on it. So, an ad agency could buy it and place it somewhere kind of as a freebie and, cross promote on it. So after growing that company to 12 employees at its peak, I ended up having an exit out of that company around 23. And I was super lost. I didn't know what to do with myself. And all my friends were in university and kind of just starting to come out and go into their corporate jobs. And I had just started this whole chapter and closed it out after almost 5 years of having the company. And I remember my board member saying to me one day, he said, "What part of the business do you like the most?" And I said, "I like talking to people, I like presenting, and I like the sales portion." And he ended up having a tech company that was downtown that was fairly well funded. So I decided, I'm going to take a shot at software sales. And I went downtown, realized that I love software sales, but I hated the commute. So I, Mississauga boy, grew up in Port Credit, was still kind of kicking around that area at that time, and decided that I wanted to switch companies to something more kind of corporate, like Fortune 500 type thing, and ended up going to a company called ADP, where I did a fair stint at. And I had a bit of an epiphany there where I was lucky to get a really senior position with a lot of guys who were older. And I noticed that the majority of them lived off their base salaries and then took their commissions and rolled it into real estate. So they lived relatively frugally, like still decent lives. They weren't like cutting off expenses and, not taking part in fun activities, but they weren't wasting money per se. Mm-hmm. And they were taking what they made there and they're stashing them away in investment properties. And they weren't super ambitious people, but even just having 2 or 3 rental properties over a 3 or 4 year period of time, I saw how it started to change their lives more so than what the job was doing. And at that point, it started to click to me that, okay, you know what, this is something that I want to start doing as well. And I had a coworker at the time who helped me get into my first property when I was 24. And that was right around the 2017 stress test crash. So I don't know if you remember that.
Of course.
So, as most people say in real estate investing, it's all about timing. That was the exact wrong piece of timing to start.
Yeah.
But over time, it ended up being a great outcome.
Did you hold it?
I did hold the property. So I ended up buying that one. It was a semi-detached house in Oakville that I did a duplex conversion on.
Nice.
I learned the hard way that you need permits to do conversions.
Okay.
And I just did the renovations as a young 24-year-old does. and got shut down by the city, and then had to go back and spend twice as much money and, learn the hard way. But I remember the tenant coming to me and saying, listen, instead of paying me $2,200 a month, I'll give you $2,000, but I'll give you 12 months up front. And I thought about it and I said, okay, makes sense. And I just remember getting that cash in my hand and thinking, man, this is the best real estate's the best. For how hard I'd have to work to go get that commission at work, to get that from just providing someone housing, I fell in love with it at that moment.
Fair. That's amazing.
So yeah, lots of stuff going on to get me here, but now pretty much everything's fully in real estate.
Yeah. And you also sell.
Yes.
Right. So which I think is cool because you attract the niche of investors. And even me, like that. I like selling. I'm a listing agent. I like marketing. I like doing that stuff. But when it comes to a lot of the investment side, I hit you up all the time because I'd rather just refer my guys to someone like you who is living and breathing the numbers, knows those markets. So I think that's a beautiful niche to be in because, you can capture a lot of business that way, right?
It's a whole different beast. Like there's pros and cons of being an agent on which side is better, whether you're on the investment side or residential. But what I would say about this on the investment side that I prefer is it's less emotional and it's more so about the numbers and the actual property itself.
Yeah.
So if you find a good opportunity, typically you can match it up with the buyer.
Yeah. And so at what point did you leave the corporate world and just go all in on real estate? Like how did that first real estate investment play out for you ultimately? 2017 stress test came out. I remember because I had my first listing signed the day before.
Oh,
and everything happened overnight.
No, come on.
So I was like, okay, first listing, amazing. $699 offer night. Everything's going 200K over asking. Like, this is easy. Like, let's do it. Boom, shut down. No showings. No one at my open house. Clients like, what's going on? I'm a noob. I have no idea what's happening. So I remember that time. I really do. I got fired. Actually, I think I got fired from that listing, but essentially we ended up getting an offer and they just took the house off the market. So it was a failure for me. But I'd love to hear your journey and then how you ended up out of corporate.
Yeah, it was an interesting time to start, right? Because that one kind of got hit by a wall. Like it was almost like COVID, but even faster, how the market corrected just because the government policy came in overnight and took effect essentially 24 hours later. So interesting time. But yeah, going back to my journey. So I bought my first property, did the duplex conversion on it, and I was strapped. Like when I mean scraping to get into this property, I really scraped everything together.
Do you want to give people just a high level what a duplex conversion is?
Yeah, sure. So I looked for a property that I can do something called house hacking. And house hacking essentially means where you live in one unit and then you rent out another unit or two to help offset your carrying costs. I was 24 years old. I had a little bit of money and I knew I wanted to go buy, but I didn't want to get stuck in the renting bubble and not be able to save. So I was willing to stretch myself a bit to get into the first property, knowing that I would have that rental income to help offset my carrying costs.
Okay, so then from that point, you bought that property and then...
So buy that property, get the tenant in there, and then all of a sudden I got all this debt from the properties, from doing that duplex conversion and adding the second suite. And then I know right away, okay, I want to buy another property, but I kept getting every barrier in front of me. Like I couldn't get a mortgage. Realtors didn't take me seriously because of my age. I couldn't figure out my finances and how to get things in order. And it took me about a 2.5-year journey to get the education down to figure out how to execute on my next property. And when I did, I ended up buying a triplex in Hamilton from a distressed seller who actually had a Cineplex. This was like right before COVID, a Cineplex that was really, really struggling, and they needed to sell the property to save their business. And I went and I got that property. And the one thing that I learned between the 2.5 years between my first property and my second was I was lacking the education. And if I would have learned that education within a 6 months time frame, I probably could have got that house a lot sooner and seen the appreciation. But, everything's hindsight 2020, right? So I buy that triplex in Hamilton and I decide, okay, you know what? I'm going to buy the rundown property. I'm going to go renovate every unit. Budget $100,000, start doing renovations, quickly goes to 150, 160.
And you're funding yourself?
Everything, my whole portfolio I funded myself.
Up to now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So past couple months, I've done a couple joint ventures, but for the first $10 million of properties, all self-funded, doing what's called the BRRRR strategy.
Cool.
So buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. So I did that exactly in the Hamilton property. I did renovations, turned out the tenants, cash for key people, and was able to increase the performance of the asset. And then I was able to refinance it. So I bought it for 600, put about 150 into it, and refinanced it 6 months later at around 1.1 million.
What was that turnaround time?
Pretty quick. It was like 6-7 months.
Wow.
So I had a bit of a kicker, right? I had the wind coming behind me from the market pushing up at that time. And then I also had the strategic renovations that I did. So I was forced appreciating it, and I got natural appreciation from the market.
Yeah.
So then at that point, I'm addicted, right? I want to buy rental properties. And there was a story that really inspired me that I saw in Toronto Life from a guy named Sahil Jaggi. So,
Shout out Sahil.
Yeah, great guy, right?
Yeah,
I think he's been on the pod before, right?
Yeah. A couple times. Yeah,
So,
solid dude.
I read his article in Toronto Life, and it gives me this kind of come to life moment. I'm like, hey, I got to meet this guy because I love real estate. I want to scale, but I don't know how to do it. And I just DM him on Instagram. We go and we meet for a couple hours, and he kind of methodically walks me through the BRRRR strategy and how to scale. And from that meeting, I went back from the refinance I was doing with the triplex, and I leveraged it to go buy 2 more properties. So now I have the Oakville duplex, the Hamilton triplex, and I go to a city called Owen Sound, which is about 45 minutes north of Collingwood, and I get a triplex and a duplex.
And this is from, are you leveraging the Oakville and Hamilton for both of these, or just the Hamilton?
Just the Hamilton one. I was living relatively frugally, within my means per se, and then using my commissions from work, including the refinance money, to grow everything forward.
And what were, if you don't mind sharing, what were you able to refi out of the Hamilton project in the 6-7 months?
I was able to get about 300,000 back.
That's amazing.
Which was a full BRRRR plus some.
Yeah.
So in that short period of time, believe it or not, it was pretty common back then for people to do that, but nowadays it's a little bit more challenging.
And this was in the 2017 rush after?
This was around the 2019.
Okay. Oh yeah, 2 years.
Yeah, pre kind of COVID. COVID was just coming in type thing.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of insecurity in the market, but it hadn't really shocked the system yet.
Yeah.
So now I leverage that, and now I have 4 properties. So then things start to move forward, and a year later, I end up getting a Toronto Life article. And just like Sahil, because I kind of reached out to them and I said, listen, I listened to this guy's journey. I was super inspired by it. Now this is where I'm at in my path. And then within a night, I had 500 people reach out to me when my story went live.
Crazy.
And a lot of people at that point said, listen, we want to follow your journey. You've bought all these properties during a certain amount of time. Can you teach me how to do so? So in one night, I realized I'm like, well, there's an opportunity to help all these people. People help me along my journey. So how do I help them and give back? And while I was going through that whole process, I ended up buying another property in Collingwood, which is just finishing up. And I was able to buy another property in Hamilton. So biggest thing that people always ask is, how do you get the mortgages, right? Because that's usually the biggest barrier.
Yeah.
For me, it was using something called rental offset and zero impact lending.
Okay.
With Scotiabank specifically.
And what is that?
So if I could buy a property that would have more revenue than the expense on the property, the bank would not look at it in my ratios as a negative. So they would allow me to keep borrowing against it as long as the property supported itself like a business. And then what they would also do as a bonus is they would take a percentage of the income and they would actually add it to my income to then go qualify for the next. So I kind of got to double dip on both sides. I've always found that Scotiabank personally, when you want to scale a real estate portfolio, for me has been one of the best people to work with, and they're very friendly with multifamily investing.
Okay.
So at that point now, I have students reaching out. I've got an active coaching program, and people are starting to follow my journey. Let's just call it 2021.
Is the coaching because of, wow, I have all this inbound, I might as well start this coaching business?
Essentially, right? So when you get any large media piece, you get, some people who message you because they hate you, some because they just want to call you names.
You get haters?
Yeah, you always do, right? With stuff like that, right?
Interesting.
Especially anything to do with like finance or like the the reality is this, right? People don't want to see others do well, but the people that do want to see others do well, and usually they're relatively ambitious. And if you connect with good people like yourself, you guys can help each other grow, right? So it's about weeding those kind of people out through the amount of inbound that I had and seeing who I want to work with.
Yeah.
So the coaching program kicks off, and I'm actually in a coaching program myself because when I had that 2.5-year gap, I realized that I was lacking in scaling because I didn't educate myself. So what I wanted to do was, I'm a big believer you shouldn't teach something that you're not actively doing on a day-to-day basis.
For sure.
And I want to take what I learned from now being a larger scale investor and then teach my students every single day, whether it's something policy related, it's something happening in the market, or it's something I learned from one of my other clients, maybe on the realtor side, and bring that forward. But yeah, I essentially at that point, like the business really kicked off for coaching, and I decided to leave my corporate job shortly after. And that, for me, that was kind of the end of a chapter and the start of a new one.
Okay. And then what does your portfolio look like? So that was 2021.
Yeah.
So have you stuck to multifamily ever since?
I've always pretty much scaled with residential multifamily. And what residential multifamily is, for those who don't know, is typically 2 to 5 units. Anything over 5 units is usually what's called, larger scale multifamily, which is kind of what I'm bridging into now.
Okay.
During that time, 2021, when I left my corporate job, my portfolio size was roughly like 7 or 8 million.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you were what, 27, 26?
Something like that. Maybe I'm 31 now. So what is that? 28 maybe?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's insane.
So long story short, the article comes out, right? I'm now working for TELUS at head office, doing the same thing, software sales, just a little bit different. And I get a call one day from my boss basically saying that TELUS is exiting the industry that I'm selling their product for, and that they're basically letting everybody go. And I kind of thought, I'm like, you know what? I want to go do this on my own. I'm not necessarily ready, but I'm ready to take the chance anyways. And I'll never forget this. The last day that I so-called retired from my corporate job, doing real estate full time, right before my boss hung up the phone on me, he said something about my article and then just hung up the phone. And he lived in Vancouver. So I knew he had saw my article, and there I was talking about leaving and quitting my job. So I think that's what led me to be part of the first round of layoffs.
Yeah.
But that being said, like, leaving my job was a blessing, right? Now I can, in 2021, focus on real estate full time. Real estate is going crazy in Canada. We're a year away from the peak of the market. Students are reaching out like crazy, and I'm still continuing to stabilize and transact my portfolio. So, one thing I think that's important to mention, during that time period that I scaled to maybe $7 or $8 million over whatever the 4 or 5 years it was, there was people that I knew that started later than me that scaled 3 or 4 times quicker. And I just couldn't figure out like why or how they're doing it. And it really bugged me at the time. And then I started to realize, when the market corrected the other way, that they were just over leveraging.
Okay.
So I'm a big believer myself in, real estate isn't get rich quick. It's get rich guaranteed, but it takes time.
And slow.
Exactly. So now that I've been in the game for, 7, 8 years, I'm starting to see the fruits of my labor of growing slow and not having a super leveraged portfolio. Whereas I used to refinance maybe an 80-20 loan to value, which essentially means taking a loan on 80% of the value of the home. I'll now maybe do it to 60-40 and leave more equity in the properties, just in case of another economic downturn or something.
Yeah.
But when I left my job, it really allowed me to quit my 9 to 5 to work 24/7. And as you know, when you work for yourself, it's much easier to be able to do it because you're the sole benefactor of it.
Yeah.
So the student business started growing really quickly. I was acquiring more properties. About a year or so after, I made a partnership with Mike Rockall, who I work with now, who's a very successful multifamily realtor, who's been a great mentor and friend to me. And then I've kind of kept growing, both of those since. So my day-to-day objective is growing my real estate portfolio and trying to get that, to $20 million within the next 5 years. And then my 2 active income streams are basically the coaching business on helping people follow my journey, and then the realtor business. And it's been a really good synergy kind of helping people in between, because I can look at a property or a problem that they have from an investor eye, because I've had a lot of experience. And whether it's me or it's someone else, I at least know someone in the industry who's probably had the same kind of problem.
For sure.
But one thing I would say is this, right? Like, I had no help from anybody. No one gave me money. My parents didn't co-sign for me. There was nothing like that, right? So anybody can follow and do the same journey that I went down. The biggest thing you need to do is just take action and start with the first property. And that's where most people fail. They always find excuses not to take action.
So let's start with that. What do you think is a minimum nowadays with the way the market is that someone needs down to buy something on their own, to do self-fund essentially? And then what type of investment strategy would you go with for a starter?
Good question. So I'm a believer in delayed gratification, right? Your first house isn't supposed to be the house that you retire in or that you raise your kids in. So I always say, let's say, we're in Toronto right now. If you're renting, you're spending $2,000 a month on your condo, your goal should be, if maybe only a $50,000 or $60,000 saved or available, to buy an investment property in a tertiary market like Brantford, Hamilton, Barrie, whatever. Use a CMHC mortgage to get in with as much leverage and as little down as possible. And then use the cash flow from that asset that you bought to help offset your living costs maybe in the city. So I'd say that's one situation someone can use.
It's like a rent where you live, own your investment.
Exactly, right? If you don't want to sacrifice lifestyle. So if you want to be in the city center, but you can't necessarily afford $120,000 down for a condo or something like that, it's a good option. As of recently, there's a lot of really good government programs with CMHC allowing it to be even easier for first-time home buyers.
What is that?
So you can get 30-year amortization on properties now, and they're actually going to do different grants and incentives if you add a second unit to a rental property.
Okay.
And it doesn't need to be a pre-existing rental property, but if you add a second unit to a single-family residence that you buy and you house hack like I did, they'll essentially give you a refinance incentive to take most of your money out on a refinance.
Okay. That's just another legal unit, essentially.
Just another legal unit.
And that could be a full rental as well.
Full rental, yeah.
Okay. And
it's encouraged to bring more housing supply online.
For sure. Does that apply to anyone, even someone with multiple properties?
It's got to be a first-time home buyer.
Okay.
That's the incentive of who it's supposed to be with. Mm-hmm. There has been an interesting strategy that I heard of recently that I know a lot of people are doing, and I thought it was pretty creative. So let's say you have a friend who lives downtown, right? And that person has good qualifying power. So, maybe they make $110,000 a year, and they maybe are really bad savers. They're not financially savvy. But you, on the other hand, can scrape together $30,000, $40,000. You go and you partner up with this person as a silent joint venture. You go get them pre-qualified for a CMHC mortgage, let's say $600,000-$700,000 purchase price. You guys go out and you buy a duplex or triplex together. You gift your friend the down payment for it. They qualify for the mortgage. You guys own it 50-50, and they hold their shares in trust for you, which essentially just means that they're holding, your shares of the property for you legally. And then you get into a property that you couldn't qualify for. They get a down payment that they could never save up for. And then after a 3 to 5 year holding period, you guys sell the asset and both split your profits in different ways. Mm-hmm. Completely legal, completely fine. Each person during taxes would claim half of the revenue and expenses for them, other person half the revenue expenses for the other. Mm-hmm. But I think to simply answer your question, someone needs roughly $40,000 to $50,000 to get in their first property in Toronto, which I don't think a lot of people believe. They think they need $150,000 to $200,000. It's just simply not true.
Yeah, that was great insight. So I think a lot of people have that notion, right? And then when it comes to the cash flowing asset, do you find that it's going to be a lot easier to cash flow with something that is multifamily, like at least 2 units, a duplex, a triplex? Because, with rates and everything now and carrying costs, property tax and all that, depending on the market you're buying in, but with just a single renter, it might be hard to cover. Maybe you go net neutral.
So I would say within 2 hours of the GTA, the notion of buying a single family home and renting it and cash flowing is non-existent anymore. Mm-hmm. We're almost at an imbalance in downtown Toronto, though, where condos are dropping enough that you might be able to break even on one. And I would say that's a relatively interesting strategy right now. But overall, buying the duplex and triplex seems to be where the sweet spot is for having some cash flow on top of your carrying costs. And that's what really allows you to scale. So people who buy condos cannot grow portfolios unless they're high net worth. People who buy multifamily can scale, and there's a commonality between the two, right? Anybody who buys multifamily typically is able to scale to a bigger portfolio, whether it's duplex or above. Anybody who buys condos just simply needs cash and large income to qualify for the mortgage if you're going to buy multiple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a condo purchase, as my first investment, I understand that fully. When it comes to, so let's just say like the BRRRR method, right?
Yep.
It's fantastic. You know, you have the ability of, depending on the market conditions, but being able to essentially refi all your money back into your pocket in a short amount of time. If they don't have the money, let's say these, you know, this example we're using, you just have enough to get your down payment, enough to get into the property, but then not enough to renovate it and go through that process. What is a strategy that people can do? They don't have their own capital for that.
Great question. So I'll talk about my experience, right? Cool. When I bought my first property, I had enough money for the down payment and closing costs, but the second I took ownership, I had no money to do that duplex conversion, and I was depending on it to not impede my lifestyle, right? So I could afford the property, but I wouldn't be able to go with my friends, travel, do stuff, whatever. A big hack that a lot of investors use, and I utilize myself, is the Home Depot card. So you can get a credit card from Home Depot. That's essentially a personal line of credit. And anything you buy on the card that's over $250, you don't have to pay 0% interest for 12 months. And a lot of times they have a lot of promotions where it's 24 months at 0% interest.
Interesting.
So essentially the way you can think about it is Home Depot's the bank. They give you the loan. You don't have to pay anything up front. When you refinance, you pay Home Depot back. Now the caveat to that is if you don't pay within the year or the 24 months, whichever kind of way you decide to go, they backdate all the interest. So you got to make sure you make the payment before the end of it.
In full?
In full.
And what's the limit they can give you?
I've seen people with terrible credit and terrible jobs get 25 to 50K right off the bat.
Wow.
It's Citibank who does it in the US, and I think because it's an American lending institution, I think their underwriting criteria is maybe a little bit more looser than what some of the other banks would traditionally give here. So that's one option. Second option is, line of credit or utilizing that. And then the third option is strategic partnerships, right? So making deals with contractors that once the job's done, instead of maybe paying them $10,000, you'll pay them $11,000 when the refinance comes. Or partnering with someone who does have money that's willing to give you their short-term loan or has some skin in the game and be an equity partner.
What about like someone with a construction background as an equity partner? Like a sweat equity?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Great partner, right? The reality is of this, labor is very expensive, especially in the GTA now. Usually 60% of your renovation costs are going to be labor now.
Yeah.
So if you can get a partner to contribute that and you can bridge the rest with the Home Depot card, it's a great way to help you kind of get stabilized in your first asset.
What are some other cool tricks? I didn't know this existed. This is very cool, right? I hear a lot of people starting their journey with a credit card. I've done some real estate investing courses where I've invested into, and they're like, go to the bank and just get as much as you can on a credit card. What do you think? And then, but this also brings up a fear in a lot of people too, right? This debt,
of course,
or leveraging. What are your thoughts on maybe either combating that thought process with proof that you may have, or just sharing around that? What are your thoughts around maybe people not willing to move forward because they're just scared of accumulating debt? What are your thoughts on that?
Debt is good when it's used properly because it can amplify a profit or an outcome for an investment, right? But it can also do the same, in reverse leverage. So it's good and bad. Credit cards are typically something that I don't usually advise people to lever up on. It's more so things that are low yielding products, right? So let's say a credit card's at 23% and I can go get a line of credit at 7%. the 7 to 8% type stuff, that's where you want to be borrowing the money. You really don't want to be putting it on the credit cards, especially where there's other fees. There's a lot of credit products out there and a lot of banks that do give like fairly attractive lines of credit. The best one obviously being a home equity line of credit, but if we're talking about your first home, you won't have one of those. So what I would say is this, being a real estate investor is essentially primarily based on leverage and borrowing money, right? So there's good debt and there's bad debt. Consumer debt, which is, car loans, shopping, credit cards, that kind of stuff. That's the debt that buries you and doesn't provide much value because it can't grow as an asset. The good debt is things that go into appreciating assets like real estate or other investments and things like that, that have an ability to not only return a positive investment, but can carry the loan, pay the interest, and put a little bit on top for you. And those are the kind of products that we want to use for getting into real estate. But the reality is of this, if you want to get into real estate, you should have some money. And every real estate deal is, component of three things, right? And my rule of thumb is you can only ever borrow two of them. So you need money for the down payment, you need money for the mortgage, and you need money for the construction. Rule of thumb that I teach to all my students is out of all the three things you can borrow, only ever borrow two. And that'll always keep you above water from being in a negative equity situation.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So you just got to have some cash. Starting from zero and borrowing everything is not typically advisable. But, if you're in that position, you want to be in real estate, it's not a problem. You just got to focus on getting your money up first, minimizing expenses to then allow you to go to the next chapter.
And for someone just starting, what is the number one piece of advice you would give them?
Educate yourself and take action, right? Great example. So the first property that I bought in 2017, I bought it for $620,000. Stress test, worst time of the market, thought I overpaid for it, was super upset at the time. Sold it 5 years later for $1.5 million.
Wow.
So with the money that I had in the down payment and the gain that I made, I had $1 million check go into my bank account, tax free because it was my primary residence. And of course, that allowed me to scale into more properties after.
For sure.
But biggest thing is just take action and educate yourself.
And they can educate with you.
Exactly.
And speaking on multifamily, what do you see are some future, like the future of multifamily investing, future of the market, navigating this market, and some trends that you think maybe people should jump on? Example being this new CMHC thing around apartments, right?
Yep.
Let's talk on that for a bit.
Sure. So it's an election year, right? In the next 12 months, we have an election, and a big part of polling and what people want to hear is affordability on housing. So the government, obviously on both sides of the table, are pushing a lot of policy changes to help people either get in their first time homes, and really just kind of chase that Canadian dream. But the realities of this, a lot of it's smoke and mirrors. However, there are some pretty attractive programs. If you're a beginner investor, there's CMHC programs that'll allow you to get into your first home for as little as 5% down, up to $500,000, and then incrementally up to $1.5 million, $1 million over its 10%, and $700,000 purchase price would be 7% down. So utilizing some of those programs, if you're a first-time home buyer, are great. On the larger multifamily side, CMHC has some amazing programs too. And I think for a lot of your listeners who probably don't realize this, most of the funding that CMHC does is actually on larger commercial stuff that the government backs. So big apartment buildings and things. And they have pretty amazing incentives there because at that point, they've kind of deemed you as a competent investor, and the risks are, potentially lower than someone who's maybe not as familiar with real estate.
And so can you get into what that looks like a bit, especially the apartment side?
The bigger stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So CMHC came up with a program called MCI Select, which is pretty cool. So you can get up to, a 10-year term on a 50-year amortization with, a really good locked-in rate. So a CMHC insured rate. And there's basically 3 criteria that they want you to hit. So you can do one, you can do all of them. The goal is essentially to get to 100 points so that it'll allow you to get the highest rating with CMHC and the lowest debt service. So the first one is accessibility, which is really hard to do in Ontario because you kind of need to do it on a new build. So wheelchair access, things like that. Next one is affordability. So being able to designate at least 40% of the units in the building as lower income, or what the government designates in that area. And then the third one is energy efficiency. So can you reduce the energy output of that asset by 40 or 50% by, low flow toilets, or changing the windows, or ductless mini splits, things like that. It used to be until very recently that you could get 100 points just for doing the energy efficiency, which of course everybody was doing because it was the cheapest solution. CMHC realized that it's not actually helping with, alleviate housing crisis. So they've reduced that to 50 points. And then if you want to get to 100, you have to either add the accessibility, or you're going to have to add the affordability component combined. But, it's pretty crazy how you can leverage safely on the larger apartment building stuff. I'll give you an example. I sold a $9.5 million building last week, and our clients who's buying it, because it's going to go right into CMHC with a certain amount of leverage, they're buying it with $1 million. So they're locking up a 40 unit, $10 million asset with around $1 million because of the leverage, and it still cash flows over a 1.1 debt service.
With 10%, essentially.
Exactly.
Wow.
But the sophistication you need to pull off a deal like that is a little bit more. And obviously, the recommendation for anybody going through their journey is make your mistakes at a smaller scale in the residential investing, because those deals can hurt you, but they won't bankrupt you. When things go bad on the larger multifamily side, they'll go really bad. And because in Canada, we have recourse lending, which essentially means you're personally guaranteed on it, it'll essentially financially destroy you, right? So you really want to be able to make sure that you're at a level where you feel sophisticated enough to execute.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who are in this space with the larger assets. Something I want to get into too, leveraging. I have 3 properties, leveraging those. Best stuff we can definitely talk about. But before we end off here, I'd love to just pick your brain on a couple of things. Let's go in general. What are your favorite markets to invest in right now?
Favorite markets for me to invest in, probably Brantford, number 1.
Okay.
I like it because the purchase price is relatively low, but the rents are very high. I like Barrie because there's been a fairly large pricing correction there, and rents are fairly stable and high there. They're about the same as Toronto, if not more in some areas. And honestly, tried and true Hamilton. Like when I bought my first rental in Hamilton, I always expected to buy my whole portfolio there, but it raised so quick. And now that the market's corrected, rents are still up here, but the purchase prices have come down. So Hamilton makes sense again. So just in summary, Brantford, Barrie, and Hamilton.
Least favorite markets?
Least favorite markets, probably Mississauga, Toronto proper, I would say. And kind of the Ajax, Oshawa area, only just because I think for the kind of product they have, it's overpriced.
Fair enough. Condo market?
It makes sense. If it depends what your strategy is. If you want to buy 1 or 2 properties, I think the condo market is really starting to make sense again, because developers aren't building right now, and the lack of supply isn't going to hit until probably 2017 area. So if you can get a condo now that's relatively affordable and cheap, and I mean buy a condo that's built today. Don't be buying pre-construction that's supposed to be built in 3 years.
For sure.
I think that's a really good investment, but you just need to realize that if you do go the condo route, it is harder to scale.
For sure.
So it's got to be part of your plan.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is all amazing advice, man. It's all really good. What's next for you in your real estate journey? Any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think biggest thing for me is I just want to help other people follow my footsteps, right? So, I was able to do it with no help, and I believe others are able to do the same thing, whether it's on the mentorship and coaching side or if it's on the realtor side. I think there's a lot of money to be made for a lot of people. And, anybody who wants to reach out and kind of get some guidance on how to take that first step, I'm always there to help them. But for me, I think the next stage is kind of scaling in larger multifamily and buying bigger buildings, and then just enjoying the process and the journey, right? Like, spending time with people I want to be with and educating those who are around me that I can impact to help make their lives better.
Amazing. And for those that want to reach out, touch base with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can check me out on Instagram at Bernstone Capital or my website at bernstonecapital.com. And it's got all the information you need. But, I encourage anybody who's interested just to reach out. Happy to set up a call with anybody.
Amazing. Well, you've been awesome. Always, every time I talk to you, just wealth of knowledge. So thank you for all the education you've done. As someone who does a lot of investing on education myself, I encourage everyone to do the same. And if you guys are looking for real estate education, Jack's your guy. But to the audience out there, thank you again for always tuning in. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you on the next one.